My name is Kide, and today I'm going to be presenting about my first summative of Term 2 from AP Macroeconomics course called ADAS Model Analysis. This is the graph. It is from www.cnbc.com, and in the graph you can see the different prices for daily necessities for grocery in America, and you can see that during January 2023 it is all at its peak for prices, especially seen in eggs. The source also states that wages have not kept up with the rapid rate of inflation. That will lead to aggregate demand to decrease because people won't have the privilege to keep up with the inflation. People won't have the privilege to buy the product that is affected by the inflation, so they realize that it's better to be in budget with their economic state, so they choose to not buy the products. This is the ADAS graph to describe the previous inflation price graph of America, and it shows the aggregate supply and aggregate demand connection with price level and aggregate output. You could see for the aggregate demand that when price levels are high, aggregate output is low. Aggregate output is defined as the sum of all goods and services produced in an economy. So if the aggregate output is low because people won't buy as much products, and with that companies realize that if no one is buying, then they won't get profit, so they would rather decrease the amount of products they produce. The reason for the price level to be high is inflation, because for companies to access the materials to make the products and or services might be scarce, because a lot of the materials needed require time and effort to produce, and a lot of the materials are sourced from non-renewable materials. For aggregate supply, typically when price levels are low, aggregate output is also low, because even though a lot of people want their products because it's cheap, they don't want to provide it because that means their products will decrease fast, and means their profit is lower as compared to if they increase their price. So companies typically gradually increase the price, but when prices are at its peak, aggregate output is also at its peak, because consumers realize that to access the products back then when price levels are low is hard, so they want to make the most out of their spendings. From the ADAS graph connected to the inflation graph of grocery prices, I can conclude that prices tend to be high when affected with inflation, and that will cause aggregate output to be low because a lot of people will be out of budget. But even if they're out of budget, a lot of the people still find ways to accommodate themselves in terms of getting enough groceries. For example, instead of buying from their usual supermarkets, they buy at local markets, or instead of buying vegetables, they grow their own vegetables. That accommodation could be seen in many forms. Not only consumers, but companies are also affected, because they'll realize that not many consumers will buy their product, so they provide their products in smaller quantities. That will ensure that their product won't go to waste and that they still get profit. Keynesian perspective. So Keynesian believes that prices are not flexible. That's why changes in spendings like consumption, investment, or government spendings can easily cause the quantity of goods and services produced to change. Summary. So the perspective speaks true to my idea of what happens when there's an inflation. So it's true that prices are not flexible because resources can easily be scarce, because many demands require non-renewable materials. That easily affects the output of economy because increased prices can lead everyone to go out of budget. That means the quantity of goods and services produced changes in a country. Monetarist perspective. So the monetarist perspective believes that changes in money supply determines the rate of economic growth and the behavior of business cycle. Summary. So in inflation, usually a lot of people are out of budget, or in other words, they are experiencing changes in their money supply, similar to what is stated in the monetarist perspective. So that determines the rate of economic growth, because if people are out of budget, it will be hard for consumers to buy products, and it will also be hard for companies to provide it to them, because companies realize that there is no point in providing high quantities of products when people are out of budget, because then the majority of people won't buy their products. Hence, companies won't get as much profit. Application in different subjects. So for sociology, an example is when a person sees that prices are high for their usual necessities, so it affects their belief to not buy the products, because they realize that if they buy the products, they will be out of budget. So I can conclude that inflation is something outside their control, and that it is something that is happening within their environment. So that automatically affects their beliefs and acts, their belief of how if they buy, it will affect their budget, and their act of not buying it so that it won't affect their economic state. Another example is conformity, which is a part of sociology subject. So conformity is when a person changes their actions and beliefs because they are influenced by other people. For example, with inflation, maybe there are people who don't view the changes in prices as something that is gonna affect them. They might not realize that, but because a lot of people are not buying products that are affected by inflation, the people who didn't realize it back then choose to follow the other people, because more people are not buying it and they don't want to be left out, so they follow them. History. So inflation, how people react to inflation is connected to history, which is barter. Basically, barter is when people exchange products that has the same value, and if the product doesn't have the same value, then they choose not to barter. And that is the same with how people react to inflation. Basically, consumers exchange money with products that companies offer. But if consumers realize that the products that is offered by the company is not worth the money, then they choose not to buy it, or In other words, barter, positive attitude, and open-minded viewpoints when learning this topic. When experiencing inflation, it's important to realize that it is something out of our control because the economy is constantly changing, so prices will go to fluctuations often, and anything could affect that, whether it's global issues or non-renewable materials to make the products. That is why we need to view the changes in the economy as something that allows us to be stronger and to be more experienced rather than something that is a burden to us, because whether we like it or not, we cannot avoid it. And by viewing it as something that will make us more stronger and experienced, it can ensure that in the future, when encountering economy problems, we can know what to do and not to do when learning about it. So as a student, when learning about macroeconomics, it's important to not have high expectations, because macroeconomics is all about the study of the economy, about how it works. Oftentimes, we also make predictions, and it's normal for the predictions to be incorrect. So it's important to realize that the failure is part of the learning journey. So it's important to be resilient, because with resilience, we won't be affected with failure, but instead see it as an opportunity to improve. So in a way, by being resilient, we can learn more